call them out right quick, is Chuck Sims is an ex officio. Larry O'Neill is, all of these are representatives. Larry O'Neill and Representative Richard Royal is ex officio. You should be at every meeting here, and Ways and Means, and every other place that you should be at one time. So Penny Houston, Chairman Earhart, Whip Barry Fleming, Chairman Hembry, and our newest member is Sheila Jones. Representative Bob Lane, Representative Jeff Lewis is a new member. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Bobby Parham is a newest member, as well as Representative Chokas and former member and a longtime member John Yates. I don't think he's here, but welcome. But I'd like to get started. By the way, the members, when I pass this down, if you'll put your best contact numbers, and Mr. Ex Officio, Chairman O'Neill is here, so thank you all for coming. And as I pass this down, if you will put your best numbers on it so we can reach you at a moment's notice. But it's a great day to be in Georgia, and it's a great day to be on this committee because it does very good work, especially with our esteemed guest, Chancellor Errol Davis, and we look forward to hearing your comments as we go forward. Hopefully this won't be the last time this session, but thank you. And if you don't know who this is the Chancellor Errol Davis. And did I see Sheila come in? Yeah. Welcome, Representative Jones. Chancellor Davis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm certainly glad to be here today to give the committee an overview of the governor's budget recommendations for the university system. Now, I appreciate that I appeared before the Joint Appropriations Committee last week, so I will try not to be unduly or overly redundant with that presentation. And so I'm going to focus a bit more on our FY 2008 budget. And let me start by saying, of course, I appreciate all that you and your colleagues have done for the university system over the years. And as we enter into this process, as I said at the meeting, I understand it's a process of give and take, and I'm hopeful that you will be more giving than taking in that process. So let me start out with a sort of naked act of pandering on my part. So I have a little gift to give the chairman on his birthday. Would you pass that up to the chairman? It's happy birthday. Oh. To you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Paul. Happy birthday to you.
I was trying to get Chancellor, I was trying to get my device working, and I missed most of what you said, so I thank you very much.
Actually, this is the first time in my year that I've been here I've seen you speechless, however. Let me go on with the presentation. The governor's recommendation for the system reflects an increase of $200 million. This is a substantial increase for the system, but I want to hasten to point out that it also includes several statewide changes that are included in the budgets of other agencies, such as annualizers, one-time charges, and as you'll see, transfers as we pick up new missions. It also reflects, more importantly, the reality of a rapidly expanding system, as well as you'll see in my detail our attempts to try and address many of the workforce needs of this state. We are a system, and you will see that we're trying to act as one system to meet the needs of the state. And our guiding principle, and I will hearken back to my presentation in front of the Joint Appropriations Committee when I reference the language setting up the system from 1932. It is, again, how can the system as a whole do the best that it can for the state? So let me cut very quickly to a summary of what this $200 million represents. First, of course, is the formula funds, and you can read it, Georgia Gwinnett, a college, MCG expansion. And let me go through those one by one. I'm going to go through each one of those. Let me start with the formula of $80 million. While it is not perfect, the formula is critical to the operation of our institutions. It is the heart and soul of our budget. As you look on this slide, you will note that the bulk of the increase is due to the increase essentially in the number of students. If you look at M&O funds, health insurance, retiree funding, utilities, things of that nature, we have new buildings that are coming online. We'll have maintenance fund for that. We have health insurance premiums that have increased funding for that. We have more retirees, and utilities have increased over the past year as well. But as you can see, almost half of the formula is for an enrollment increase. But the enrollment in this formula that generated this number, I want to stress, is 254,000 students. That's what generated that credit hour number and increase. We are already serving 260,000 students. This is a 254,000 number. We are serving already 260. By the time this budget goes into effect next year, I expect we'll be serving probably 265,000. And so that is the natural lag and the push for efficiency that we must have as we utilize this formula. Now, I do believe that budgets should be policy implementing documents, and so I'd like to spend just a few moments talking about the policy areas where we are putting the money. And let me start that by showing you what we did with the money in 2007. So in 2007, we essentially had five policy objectives. They were to provide quality education to students by allocating funds for faculty operations to meet enrollment growth. We invested $24 million last year in our 35 institutions to address growth issues, just sheer volume. We wanted to enhance retention, progression, and graduation rates through targeted investments. We invested $2.2 million in a targeted program, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Again, we spoke to you about the nursing shortage. We invested $4.9 million. We invested $2.3 million plus of formula funds plus other funds to total $4.9 million in nursing programs to increase the number of nurses. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that. We spent a modest amount of money to increase efficiency and productivity. This is basically in the IT area in terms of data warehousing, setting up banner hosting for 5 institutions, expanding our PeopleSoft applications. And we invested $1.4 million in opportunities that increased access and services to our students. And again, I can talk about where that went if you have an interest. So let me go back up to retention and graduation. Here, what we said is we want to increase retention. We want to increase graduation. Where do we put this money? And what we did is we put the money where we had large populations that had retention and graduation challenges. And you can see those are the 5 institutions there. And so, again, when you say, how do you invest money for retention and graduation? How do you enhance that? If you look down on the lower left, these are the things that work. So this is a broad range of programs where we've invested this money, an additional $2.2 million across those 5 institutions. Again, I mentioned earlier nursing. We had a challenge in nursing. We made a policy thrust in that area. We invested $4.9 million in a variety of efforts aimed at increasing the number of nursing students at every level, whether it's associate, whether it's accelerated bachelor's in nursing, whether it's nurse educator programs, whether it's in simulators to help with clinical opportunities for nursing students. And I also want to point out that prior to this year, we were doing medical planning without having medical professionals on staff. Dr. Ron, who is head of the Medical College of Georgia, now has a part-time appointment as a vice chancellor in charge of our planning. And so now, again, he was the head of a major study last year, a health professions task force study, and now we are trying to systematically implement the output of that study. And these are just two examples of how your support of our system is being translated into clearly identifiable actions. So let me return now to the formula. The $38 million in enrollment funds recommended for FY 2008 will benefit all 35 institutions in our system. The system is a dynamic and growing enterprise. Our enrollment trends, if you look at those, are clearly on the upswing. We've seen significant growth between 1998 and 2006. If you look on the graph, it represents about 60,000 students over the last 8 years. To put that in perspective, we have essentially added the equivalent of a UGA and a Georgia State over the last 8 years. And so we are a growing enterprise. And we have to be if the state is to continue to grow, if our graduates are to continue to contribute to the economy. Now, clearly with growth comes challenges. And our greatest challenge is how to manage this growth, how to manage to give people a quality yet affordable education. And so therefore the focus of our allocations have to be strategic in nature, and that encompasses several strategic objectives. And these are, let me list what our strategic priorities are. The first, of course, is to meet our enrollment needs. We are growing. We have to deal with the issues and the pressures of growth. We also are undertaking an exercise to redefine whether we are providing the appropriate undergraduate education for the 21st century. We have defined an education in terms of seat times, what classes you are in versus what competencies do you have. And so as we listen to the marketplace, as we listen to people telling us what they want to see in our graduates, as we take a look at what we believe our graduates have to be competitive in a global society, we are asking ourselves the question, are we providing the appropriate undergraduate education? We are going to have buildings, and I'll say a lot more about that later, but we're expecting by 2020, conservatively, an additional 100,000 people. And again, we're looking at how can we maximize our contribution to the state's economic development. The state is investing a lot of money in this system. Again, we can always measure returns in terms of graduates and their education, but we also have direct impact as well as indirect impact on the economy. We commissioned a study last year that indicated that the university system and its employees have an impact in excess of $23 billion a year on this state. I am working personally very closely on the next to the last bullet with the other educational agency heads, with Kathy Cox, previously with Mike Vollmer, to make sure that we have in this state a seamless education system where we address issues of K through 12, where we work closely and indicate our standards and what we would like students to learn, how that gets translated down. Again, this has been an effort over the last year in which we're taking great pride. The AEAH, the Alliance of Educational Agency Heads, has a strategic plan. And again, I'm pleased that we're all working towards the same goal of turning out more educated Georgians. And lastly, we need to continue to focus on affordability, and we need to focus on the efficiency of our operations. And we've done a number of things in the affordability area. If you remember, last year we put in a guaranteed tuition program. This is the first year of that. Those who entered in the fall of this year will not see an increase in tuition for the hopefully 4 years or 2 years that they attend our institutions. Now, let me move away from the formula to talk about some other key recommendations for 2008. Let me begin with our newest institution, Georgia Gwinnett College. Again, I want to thank you for your support. This college serves and it is the only educational access point in one of the fastest growing counties in the country. This will be the only educational access point for the system for over 750,000 residents. We opened our doors in 2006 to juniors. Next year we'll add a freshman class. We expect to have over 10,000 students here within a 4-year period. And that's an easily predictable demand. There are two issues that we wrestle with Georgia Gwinnett. The first, of course, is the formula does not address startup investments. We need to hire a lot of faculty by next fall for the freshman class, up to 150. We also have to get this institution accredited. In order to be accredited as a 4-year institution, it has to meet certain requirements. It has to have certain facilities, and we are struggling to get those in place. So it is a challenge to get this up and running and fully functioning as an accredited institution. The next is an MCG expansion. And again, what we're interested in is to have more doctors. And I don't want this to get lost in a debate about more medical schools. Because, again, we rank 37th in this nation in terms of physicians per capita. This is not a debatable point. It is a fact. We do need more physicians in this state. And the governor has recommended $3.8 million to help us to begin to improve this statistic. It will not change overnight. This is an extremely long lead time effort. If we're to start the process this year, we will not enroll our first student until 2009. We will not get our first graduate until 2013. We will not get the first incremental doctor until 2016 if we start today. And we have a shortage today. And so, as you might imagine, we are anxious to get started. Our expansion in Athens is consistent with our strategy to utilize MCG's resources to make it the focal point for expansions, to expand our clinical sites, as well as to expand healthcare efforts in other parts of the state. We will be doing third year and fourth year expansions in Albany and Savannah, and again that will provide more clinical opportunities to those students and hopefully enhance medical services for those communities as well. This site in Athens will not only be a third and fourth year site, but we will have first and second year science taught there as well. And so that is one of the beauties of this site, is that we do not have to duplicate the intellectual capital. We have it at UGA. We can leverage for the first and second year of medical school, the intellectual capital that we have there. We are trying to acquire, as many of you know, a property there. And again, we need to start the process, and the monies are in the budget essentially for us, a significant planning effort to get that up and running. We are transferring from DTAE, the aviation school at Cochran, to our facility, to our Middle Georgia College there. The merger of Middle Georgia College and Georgia Aviation Technology College will, in fact, create a synergy, and it will also meet a market need. The market is telling us, they're telling the Georgia Aviation Technical College that increasingly airlines want their pilots to have 4-year degrees. And we will be able to offer 4-year degrees as well as the existing certificate programs after we make this combination. And so, again, we will be responding to the market. We're talking about an increase of $17.5 million for MRR in cash. And again, here, this is not our entire MRR budget. Our entire MRR budget is $60 million, but we'd like to start to make the transition from bonding to cash for the simple reason that we are trying to match up the expenditures and the lives of the expenditures. The example I gave, for example, in the joint session was that you would not, in fact, borrow for 15 years to pay for a car. And so we have a lot of short-term projects, and we believe that it's more appropriate, again, to fund them on an ongoing basis than it is to bond them. And it is my understanding that this first tranche represents the first of a 4-year step to try and move MRR funds in total to a cash basis over a 4-year period of time. And we believe that reflects a more fiscally responsible approach to maintenance, repair, and rehab. So, again, let me go back to our chart. I'm not going to spend time talking about the remaining 3 that are highlighted in any great detail. GRA, Mike Cassidy of the Georgia Research Alliance is going to be talking to you specifically about this $10 million. The statewide improvement number of 65.3, while it certainly is a large number, really relates to changes that are shared by every other state agencies. This includes the funds for the salary increase recommendation, the annualization of last year's salary increase, our workers' compensation premiums, and some other minor changes. Last item on the list of about $10 million, let me give you a little detail on that because I know you do have some interest in some of these items. There's $500,000 for UGA campus at Griffin. I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. There is $1 million of M&O funds for agricultural experimental stations. There's $297,000 formula increase for our libraries. Our small business innovation, about $200,000. SREB, again, we pay dues there. Georgia Public Television, Georgia Cancer Coalition. The Lion's share of that is for the Georgia Cancer Coalition, 6.1 of the 6.8 million. There are other program adjustments, health utilities, healthcare premiums that have already. This is really sort of an annualization of those, about 1.6 million. There's a change in the teacher's retirement system contribution rate, and we also had a negative here, just to show that sometimes we do give money back. There is a $600,000 decrease in that as well, which I certainly will be happy to talk about at some length. Let me go back to item number 1 at Griffin, because this is a program that has tremendous local investment. The local community has put up $10 million to create us facilities to teach in this area. They're going to build a building in Griffin. We're spending about $640,000 a year there now. We will add $500,000 to that. The board has already approved 2 programs to be put in place there, a bachelor's in agriculture and a bachelor's in environmental science. We are leveraging the system capacity by not trying to replicate in the first 2 years of these majors the basic core experience. We will have Gordon College come over and do that, and so we'll not have to duplicate that. And then as you get into the specifics of the major in the 3rd and 4th years, those will certainly be taught there. We have about 47 students there right now, split pretty evenly between graduate students and undergraduate students. By next fall, we expect to have 125 students there. And so, again, that's up from 47. This is both responding to local need and also indicative of the type of growth that we are seeing throughout our system. Let me move from the general appropriations to the capital budget. We are without a doubt, the state's largest owner of buildings. We have over 3,100 buildings. This is more than half of the state's holdings. We have over 73 million square feet of space. Our replacement value is in excess of $10 billion. But as I said, we continue to grow. I am sitting on, as we speak, here today, capital requests in our 10-year plan of over $3.4 billion over the next 10 years. To put that in perspective, the entire bonding of the state last year for every agency was $1 billion, and I'm sitting on $3.4 billion of requests. And so, again, what that says to me and to us is that we have to be very thoughtful about how to meet our capital needs. And because of that, we started last year with the development of a new capital allocation model, which was strategic in nature. That model is scheduled to kick in 2009 in total. We've used it partially this year. I'll point that out to you. But again, we've stayed somewhat with a mix of the traditional list approach plus the use of the model to identify strategic priorities this year. So you should view 2008 as a transition year. Let me talk about our major capital requests. I'll break it into three groups here. Equipment to fill up buildings which are already either completed or soon will be completed. We now have to put the equipment into those buildings. That's about $6 million. We have gone through the projects these under construction here have been completely funded for design and are on track. And so again, those are shown. There are 4 buildings there at Savannah, Macon, Fort Valley, and UGA. These essentially were on a list that you saw last year. And so these are moving forward. The last 2 at the bottom were not on a list necessarily that you saw last year, or were not the next 2 on a list, but represents our attempt at trying to meet the strategic priorities of the state. The first is for a $55 million building at Kennesaw State University. Of that $55 million, we're going to raise $13 million from private funds, and we would like to get $42.5 million in state bonding. Again, that's to address nursing. You need 3 things to turn out nurses. You need clinical opportunities. You need classroom and laboratory space, and you need instructors. We have 2 of the 3 at Kennesaw. We do not have the laboratory and classroom space. We turned away last year at Kennesaw 1,697 fully qualified nursing applicants that we could have taken into the system if we had had the means to do that. They were fully qualified. We had to turn them away. We turned 1,500 away, slightly more than 1,500 away the year before. I don't want to imply that they didn't go elsewhere or they didn't find other opportunities, but they did not get into Kennesaw. Georgia Gwinnett, I mentioned to you that there are certain things we have to do to get this institution accredited, and one of them is to build a library. And this is for a $28.3 million library, and that includes only the building. It does not include the books and the equipment and the computers that we will later have to put in that building. So starting a new institution is an expensive proposition. Let me turn to quickly some other capital. You will, again, with Mike Cassidy, have some discussion about $19 million for laboratories and equipment for GRA eminent scholars. He will be the expert on that. I would say at this point that this has been a good investment for this state. We now have 154 eminent scholars. Those 154 individuals are responsible for over $100 million in sponsored research. And so our eminent scholar program has been a very cost-effective program for this system. We'll ask for $900,000 for equipment needs for our traditional industries programs, primarily in 3 areas: food processing, pulp and paper, and carpet and textiles. And again, let me now conclude the 2008 with a very quick look at the 2007 amended budget, because the governor has recommended 3 items in the amended budget. They're pretty self-explanatory. Again, there's $2.5 million for health insurance premium increases. I mentioned earlier that the teacher retirement system contribution rate had changed. There's $322,000 for that. And again, $90,000 for upgrading of servers and for internet filters. We are in compliance with the law, which says that by January of this year we have to put internet filters in all of the libraries. The federal law, the Children's Internet Protection Act, does mandate that we put filters in place to protect minors from illegal as well as from quote-unquote harmful to minors sites or materials. And so, again, this is funds to support that effort. The filters are in place. We're upgrading. I believe this will pay for about 5 servers based on the traffic that we are getting, and, again, the growth in the use of libraries. This concludes our overview of the governor's recommendations. And, again, before I take questions, I'd like to thank you for your past support and all that you have done and will do to help us, again, create one more set of educated Georgians. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks, and I'll be happy to either try and answer or deflect any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Chancellor. Thank you, Chancellor Davis. I wanted to add that we've had Representative Hembry come in and Representative Fleming come in, and thank you for your attendance here. This is quite informative discussion we've had, about to have, but I got lights, 2 or 3 lights here. Who was first? Chairman Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chancellor, thank you for your presentation. I'm appreciative. I wanted to draw your attention to the special funding initiatives on page 285, 86, and get a sense of you've got $46 million.
Hold just a second. They can't hear you.
285 and 286.
Mr. Chairman, would you put the mic closer to you? They can't hear in the back. Thank you.
285 and 286. Can you hear me now? You've got an increase there, and I see what those are, 1 through 5. But you've got a total special funding initiative of $46 million. Now, I realize, Mr. Chancellor, that in the I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the tracking sheet. I'm looking at the budget document, the governor's recommendation. You've got $46 million that are in the special funding initiatives in total. You've got about $14 million in increases that are in the governor's recommendation, adding up to that total of 46. Now, in the last couple of years, those are no longer, as they used to be, itemized in our budget documents. We don't see what they are, so that we can effectively look at them and see if they're still meeting basically a means test for use. What I'd like to ask is if you would please provide this committee the entire list of the special funding initiatives, so that we can continue to see what we're spending money on in those. Do you have that? Okay. And secondarily, in the formula funding,
yeah, could I also address that while he's passing out the list? I should also point out that the chairman has already asked for an audit of the effectiveness of the spending in those areas, and I believe that audit will start next week or so. And so you will not only have a list, which I hope you all have by now, but you will also have a report on the effectiveness of the spending in those areas.
And the second question I have is, how do those initiatives in that portion of the budget relate to the formula presentation? You've got $13 million on the formula lines. Are those separate, or are those aggregate?
Let me try and get a copy of the safe sheet that you're looking at here.
I'm sorry, I'm referring to the governor's budget request. You've got an overall $46 million. I think that math will work. 46 minus 14 is the 32 that are on here, Tom. I think that's correct, and those are those. I'm appreciative of the audit, and this does help us. Now, tell me how, in the formula section of the governor's budget, there's $13,097,000 under public service institutes. Are those part of the public service initiatives that are in the regular budget request? Are they separate? Are they new special funding initiatives?
Yeah, I'm going to have to get back to you because I'm. Yeah, we can answer, but I can't triangulate the number you're using to the number I have right here. Of the program funds, okay, I see an FY 2008 of $46.7 million. Is that the number you're looking at?
That's correct. That was the number in the program budget.
Okay.
And over here in the formula presentation, you have another $13 million in public service institutes. Are those related? Is that additional? Is that because the formula has increased by $80.7 million overall? Mm-hmm. Are those public service institutes related to the public?
Those are separate.
Okay, can you get us a list of what those?
Absolutely.
Institutes are?
Absolutely. Be more than happy to do that.
That's all I have.
Chancellor.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming today and speaking with us about the budget. A couple of issues I want to ask you about, and one is the Gwinnett Library, another one is something to do with MCG. On the Gwinnett Library, I think you mentioned obviously having to have that for accreditation purposes. I started thinking when I first started practicing law about 12 years ago, one of the busiest rooms in my law firm was the law library, especially for the young associates because we had to go in there and do research. It's a much smaller room now, and it's the loneliest room in my firm because everybody gets their research right from their desk. Everything we need is online. To what extent has that been taken into account with the money that you need to build this very large library? I mean, how much floor space are we using for books, and what does the future hold in that area?
That's an excellent question because the answer to that question is that the library I went to and the library that many of you went to is not the library of today. The library of today is the town center. It is the meeting center. It is the social center. It is the place. It is the place where you go to access computer equipment. And so what you will see in our libraries, in addition to normal stacks and periodicals, and certainly utilizing Galileo and our other tools to its fullest, you will see a lot of meeting rooms where students are studying, where they come together and do their team projects in those rooms. You will see rooms being made available to the community as well. You will see large rooms of data stations and computers where, again, people come in and access data from the Internet. So this is not just the traditional build the building and throw the stacks in there and everybody has to keep very quiet. These are very lively places. They're quite different from the library that existed when I went to school.
I'm sure that would be the case. I didn't know that these accreditation agencies require you to do something archaic with floor space for a certain amount of books. I mean, there used to be a requirement for certain schools to reach certain levels. You had to have so many volumes, and I don't know if they still do that kind of thing.
There is a requirement that we have more collections for a four-year institution than for a two-year institution, and particularly in terms of journals and access to them. And again, believe me, we have factored what we can get from the Galileo databases into that as well. And we have actually had to make a commitment to a library, to the accrediting agency, because we cannot wait for this building to be built before the institution is accredited, because if it is not accredited, students are not eligible for federal aid support. And so we've had to make a commitment to build a library, and again, I'm hopeful that you will be supportive of that commitment, because if we cannot get students eligible for federal aid, we cannot essentially enroll the students that we have, because they need aid. A large percentage of our students are on aid.
Thank you. The second part of that I wanted to ask you about, if I could, Mr. Chairman, was about the Medical College of Georgia, and I want to follow up on a question I asked during the hearings last week, and one that Chairman Harbin followed up on, and that is a dental school at the Medical College of Georgia. I want to make sure I understand this correctly, but For the other committee members that maybe haven't had a chance to talk with Dr. Ron there, we only have one medical school in Georgia. Excuse me, one dental school in Georgia. Emory had one 20 years ago and they've closed it. We only produce about 50 or so dentists a year. The need is at least 200 a year in Georgia. The current building we have was built almost 40 years ago. It's full of asbestos.
Absolutely.
The rooms and the mechanics that carry water and electricity to the stations where they teach dental students are too small to hold modern equipment to teach these kids that they're going to work on when they open my mouth and yours and our Georgia citizens. It was such an important item. It was number 2 on the Regents building list. However, unfortunately, I don't think the design money, which I think is in the $4 to $5 million range, was not put in the initial governor's budget. And my question to you, if this committee doesn't put that money in for the design of that dental school, what are we going to do when the equipment that these kids are being taught on can't even be replaced now? You can't buy spare parts for it because it's so obsolete, and they can't expand the current building because it costs more to deal with asbestos than it would cost to build a new one. What are we going to do?
Well, let me say first that you have made a better case and a more eloquent case than I could have from here, so I certainly am appreciative of that. You are very correct that we cannot replace the equipment, and we're having trouble maintaining the equipment, and if new equipment won't fit in these buildings, and you appropriately pointed out if we are in any way to try and modify these buildings, we'll have a horrendous asbestos remediation tab. And so that is why a new dental school remains one of our highest priorities. You are correct, the planning funds were not included by the governor. Again, I have not discussed this with the governor. I can only make the assumption either that he did not share our priorities or we did not make a good enough case to him to convince him. But again, it is high on our priority list.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chancellor. Good to see you again.
Good seeing you, sir.
That number that you gave us a few minutes ago was pretty astounding with Kennesaw, with the nurses. Roughly 3,000 people had been turned away because they were applying to programs for nursing at Kennesaw and there was no place for them. So I'm very grateful that you are pursuing that because obviously you know the great need in our state. So I commend you for that. But you said you don't know what happened to them. I think we need to figure out, if we're losing 3,000 people, surely I know they may go into the programs. I understand that. There may be other degrees that they pursue. But if there's such a need for nurses, we need to have some kind of ability to find out what is happening. Or are they just throwing in the towel and pursuing something else? Or what's happening to these 3,000 people in the past 2 years?
That's an excellent question. I would suggest to you that all of them did not get into one of our institutions. We turned out 2,300 nurses last year, up from about 2,000 the year before. We're investing about $40 million a year in nursing education. We are working with the DTAE system to coordinate nursing education to turn out more nurses at every level. We are wrestling with the structural problem of how to get nurse educators when they can make substantially more as practitioners, and so we're going to have to address that this year as well. And so you're right, I don't know where they went, to be honest with you. I don't know that any college tracks where people don't go, what ultimately happens to that person. The only thing that we've been looking at is the raw numbers and trying to get that up. And again, it would be a tremendous boost if we could, in fact, admit a significantly higher percentage of those who are applying into that school.
The program at Kennesaw, and I commend you because I think you're going in the right direction at Kennesaw with this nursing program, especially in Metro Atlanta. Something I would encourage you to do, especially when you're looking at Gwinnett, because as you said, you're in the early stages of the programs out there and the accreditation. Obviously, nursing's a big shortage problem, but as we know, with higher education, we're having a problem with teachers and putting teachers into our public school system. So if that could be an initiative that the Regents could look at, that say Kennesaw will have a great emphasis on nursing, we need another metro school to have an emphasis on providing the number of, we do not have a facility or an institution that's providing the number of teachers that is currently needed in our school system. And we just need to address that. And if we're going to put so much money into buildings, specifically Gwinnett, then we need to have that at the forefront of the issues that we address. Some kind of program where we roll out a certain number of students every year, guaranteed. They do some kind of cooperative effort, I don't know, in their student teaching. But I hope that they'll make an emphasis, and maybe Gwinnett could be the school that we go to in the state of Georgia that turns out the number of teachers that we need, because it's a serious problem and it's not going to go away.
Absolutely. I have initiated a number of what I call system-wide projects. We have a system-wide project that focuses on turning out more teachers in science and in mathematics. Again, we're doing such things as, for example, kids at Georgia Tech who think they want to ultimately be teachers. We're setting up programs in cooperation with Georgia State, which does have a teaching mandate, to work with Georgia Tech to get us teachers faster. And so another aspect of this, and I have to be candid, is we have to look at whether we're putting our aid money in sync with our public policy needs for nurses, for teachers. For example, I would suggest to you that I cannot tell the difference, and perhaps you cannot as well, of a teacher with a 2.95 average and one with a 3.0 average. And yet the one with the 3.0, we're making a substantial financial commitment to that teacher, but we're not making any financial commitment to the one with the 2.95, and we need that teacher desperately. That 2.95 CUME teacher is one we want in our system. And as I say, and if you look at the pass rates on their exams, there's no discernible difference until you start to get to significantly lower GPAs. And so these are going to be qualified teachers, and we can't afford to lose them because we're not putting our public policy support with our public policy needs. And so, again, we'll try and come forward with workforce development proposals over time that match up our aid with our needs as well. And clearly they're going to be in the teacher area as well as in the medical professions area.
Chancellor, you're quite at ease this year as opposed to last year, and I know you're doing your homework. I hear very, very good things about you. I had a couple of questions. You mentioned a while ago an astounding number, $3.4 billion. That's over the next 10 years.
Yes, sir.
For capital projects. And we realize that, and over the last 2 years, we've been trying to struggle with how to do that. And we have a group here today that may have some possible solutions for part of it. And then a friend back at home has said that there's a University of Kentucky has a collaborative effort where they're raising a certain amount of funds to try to meet these needs. And as you know, we've looked at possibly the capital market. This seems like a dirty word, venture capital funds, but we've got to open up alternative ways to finance this $3.4 billion. And I wanted to say one other thing to put in your question is, are we building to have offices or buildings to have classrooms? And what's the priority there? We build a $38 million building. How much of that is really going to meet the needs of the classrooms as opposed to just having a pretty building on campus? I know that was a long question, but...
No, it's an excellent question. What I will suggest to you is, that I was going to get out of the way for Linda here, since Linda told me to get out of the way just now. But we have a slide which shows parameters in our capital model, and I'll let Linda come up and discuss how we need to do it from here.
The first thing I'd like to draw your attention to is on that $3.4 billion. If you look at the middle square, we're not expecting to get all of that in GO bond funds from the state, and so we truly do recognize these alternate financing methods. We've been exploring some of those. We know we didn't write the book on that, and so we are going to continue to look at what other states are doing to look at that alternative financing mechanism and to make sure we're doing everything possible to leverage the state dollars that you do make available to us to meet these needs. As it relates to pretty buildings, efficient buildings, effective buildings, we are very interested in, very much committed to efficient and effective buildings in higher education. That is a complementary component of classrooms, offices, meeting spaces and libraries, a collaborative type of space. In this system, we have done strategic master planning and specifically facilities master planning to make sure on any given campus we have the right complement. So you don't want to go out on an initiative that just builds classroom, because if you don't have faculty offices to teach in those classrooms, you're going to have a dysfunctional campus. We are looking at the driving factors in our formula, structural factors about credit hours, the age and condition of our space inventory, and the current space deficit if you look at national standards for teaching in higher education. And we're basically looking at historically the amount of funding that the state has made available for higher education. And what we're trying to do is flip the model over. Instead of us always just coming to you hat in hand to get a capital project as though we've won the lottery and we take that home, what we want to do is take that state initiative funding, look at an appropriate way that it could be divvied up amongst our 35 institutions through these structural factors of allocation, and then challenge our campuses to leverage those dollars with donor funds, with finance funds that then could complement. And you would then get the right complement of classroom buildings with projects that have a revenue stream for financing. So the parking decks, and whether you have housing on campus, but other types of things that might have a revenue stream associated with them. When we feed these factors in addition to the structural factors that drive the allocation of funds, we're looking forward as well, not just at what has gotten us to this point, but the strategic factors going forward, where we can teach, where we can deliver more nurses, not just build a building because it's convenient to build a building there, but if we build a building there, will it have the complementary space for clinical? Will we have the faculty available to teach in that facility? So we're looking at where the growth potential is in the state and other strategic plans to meet this state's needs, whether it's an economic development, growth, whatever it may be. We've taken all those factors, fed it into this total $3.4 billion need, and then over the next year we're going to put together a plan, a 6-year plan that's going to show you where we would target this money, specifically by institution, by project type, not just of your state GO bonds, but for the complementary private funds that we would bring in to leverage those funds. Certainly. Well, I know you have an appreciation for my profession as an architect, given that your son is one. There's nothing that says a pretty building can't be efficient, but that is not the focus. We are looking at utilization, and when you look at our campus master plans, the emphasis is on building a building that's efficient, that fits in on the campus. We don't need any iconoclastic architectural statements. We want buildings that are going to complement the surroundings and the community to fit in and contribute to your education.
Yes.
Thank you.
Chancellor.
Yes, sir.
When you were doing your presentation on healthcare professionals, you mentioned something about Albany. Can you tell me more about what you were referring to?
Yes, sir. What we plan on doing for the Medical College of Georgia needs, just as I mentioned for nursing, you needed clinical opportunities. We have to expand the clinical opportunities for our medical students. And so we want to put third and fourth year clinical teaching sites in Albany and in Savannah.
Are you familiar with the Darton College $5 million project that was deferred by the governor in the bond sales that was in last year's budget?
No, sir.
Okay.
But I'm sure there's somebody here that does.
Now, I'd like to see if anybody knows what the status of that is.
You're talking about the project that the General Assembly approved?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That was passed in the budget.
I will ask GSFIC for an update and get their latest information.
We're looking for, this is an allied health classroom building, and we're looking for more healthcare professionals. I would have thought that y'all would have pursued that with the governor to see if he did not go ahead and authorize the sale of those bonds.
My understanding of the bond sales is that those that are authorized would be sold, but the governor determines the pace within a certain period of time of when they will be sold, and so we don't have any control over that.
Mr. Chairman?
We're going to have to keep moving.
This is relevant to that. Now, we were told when those bond sales were deferred, is there no one here from GSFIC? Maybe Ms. Daniel could tell that none of those projects would be delayed. Those were only deferred in the bond sale because it would not affect the overall schedule of any of those projects from a design or construction perspective. Is that true as far as you know?
As far as I know, we are moving forward with the selection of professionals, and that particular project is in the next bond sale. Has been requested by us for that. There were a number of projects that the funding was deferred, but they are in this current bond sale.
But they're not from what we were told. Now, that's what I want to. Were you told the same thing that we were told, that the overall schedule of those deferred projects would not be affected? Purely, simply, not at all. Because if they are, that means the governor's office has deferred things that we in the budget voted for. And I would hope that that's not the case. Have they told you that those schedules are going to be more lengthy? Yeah. Okay. I guess I need to look into that further, because I was told there would be no delays consequent to those deferred bond sales. And it was well known among the GSFIC and the regents that there would be no delays, so that Darton College shouldn't be delayed in that sense, because there would have been a lot of different discussion with respect to a deferment on that bond sale if we'd have known there had been a delay. I promise you.
Well, we'll
on
get
any
you
of those projects.
I've got one follow-up question.
Yes, sir.
You were talking about moving the Georgia Aviation Technical College to Middle Georgia College. Can you tell me why that was done?
Again, this is something that was a result of a discussion with Commissioner Vollmer and myself, and as well as his having earlier, I believe, discussions with the governor on what would be the strategy to make that facility more robust, more utilized, and again, how do we respond to meeting the market needs when the market is telling us they needed 4-year aviation degrees, and if in fact we were not going to be able to offer them there, would we in fact lose students over time and have even less utilization of that facility? And so, again, one of the suggestions that we talked through was to look at to see whether it's appropriate to combine the two, to put a team on that. We did so and ultimately reached the judgment that that was the appropriate thing to do.
Thank you.
We're going to have to move real quickly, because would you mind coming back next week for maybe 30 minutes, an hour, or some of your people? Because we have some follow-up questions, and we're trying to stay with some schedule. You have a...
Yeah, I don't know my schedule right now, okay, but let me check on that.
Maybe next week for an hour, just to have some follow-up questions to this. Sure. But thank you. If not, choose some of your staff.
Yes, sir.
Representative Sam, make it quick.
Okay, I got here on the tail end. I'm over on Ways and Means. I apologize. I was listening to the discussion about leveraging money versus, I guess that would be endowment money at the colleges versus the money that we would get and sort of spread it out over. Do you not think that the small colleges would be at a disadvantage for not having those, and then those large endowments, say that the university system does, such as UGA and Georgia Southern and Georgia Tech and Georgia State? Those small schools will be at a disadvantage with that money. Do you not think?
The smaller schools certainly don't have the fundraising capabilities of some of our larger institutions, but then on the other hand, nor do they have the need for the scale of fundraising. What we're trying to do to address that is several things. One, we're trying to assess at each institution what in fact is or should be the fundraising capability of that institution, and our expectation should be no greater than that, and then we will try to meet their needs with that expectation in mind. So we will not have the same expectations of a Bainbridge, perhaps even from a percentage basis, that we would as a Georgia Tech. But for the first time, we're going to try and set targets for advancement across every institution.
A lot of issues, especially with dormitories, with the public-private type of funding. Can you elaborate on that and how that is going to play out in this disbursement of money that you intend to do?
Okay. Again, a lot of the facilities in there were facilities that will be built through public-private partnerships. Again, whether it's dormitories, whether it's parking ramps, whether it's student centers, some of those would be built that way, and it will require some public-private monies. And so, again, no, sir. No, sir. That would not.
Representative Chokers has a quick question, and then we'll wrap it up. And what number are you, sir?
Five. Chancellor, you alluded to this last week at talking about the challenges we face with more classrooms, more buildings for more students. What efforts have been made at making classes scheduled at non-traditional times?
Again, from a system perspective, and let me, at least at my level, we haven't had a significant thrust. But I pointed out in that meeting, as before we build new buildings, one of the questions we have to ask is what is the utilization of the present buildings, and how can that utilization be changed? What sort of signals can we send? I had a meeting with President Patton, in fact, last Friday, talking about, is it possible to send price signals in terms of if you go on Friday afternoon, and nobody goes on Friday afternoon, and we've tried Saturday morning with limited success as well. And so the buildings are there 24/7. The question is, what are the appropriate signals to get the people into the buildings to make them more fully utilized? And so that's a problem that we haven't resolved, but it's a problem that no one has resolved. But I think we're willing to look at things such as, time of day tuition. For example, to say that, if you're willing to go to school very early in the morning or very late in the evening. But it also depends on the demographics. For example, Georgia State is full very early in the morning because now people are going to school before work as well as going to school after work. And so it may be the 3 o'clock hours. And so it varies by institution. And so we have to understand what a problem is first. But I can assure you that before we put up new buildings that we're going to ask tough questions about utilization of existing buildings.
Thank you, Chancellor. We'd like to have you back and your staff, hopefully in the next week, to follow up on some of these questions that we may have. And the members, make your notes, and we'll have you back in next week, perhaps.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the opportunity. Happy birthday to you. And if you share those with your colleagues, it would not be a bribe.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, if we're going to spend the time and effort on the bond projects, that kind of thing, and those can be deferred and not done based on the will of this committee and this legislature, we're spinning our wheels. That's one of the most outrageous things I think I've ever seen. The entire intent in this budget has always been that those projects would be a part of the sale. And we are participating in an almost useless exercise with the capital outlay projects if they can be deferred or just not done by the executive branch. So we need to look into that seriously and get some absolute answers with respect to what's happening with that. And I would hope that the next time maybe somebody from GSFIC could talk to us, or the executive branch or somebody else, because what are we here for?
I wasn't proactive today. I didn't ask for GSFIC to come, but I will do it. I will get with them and we'll get back with y'all.
Chairman Earhart, we'll make a call to GSFIC and have them
Appropriations Committee and do some specific, a little bit more detail, but our time frame is such. You know, I spoke to you, and if you look at your handout that was handed out of the PowerPoint, the economic impact of DTAE on Georgia is fairly something to be fairly proud of. We certainly are at DTAE, and I know that you all are by the generous way in which you have supported DTAE over the years, and the colleges in your local communities. We are an economic impact on those communities and across Georgia. And if you look at that first page called Economic Impact of Technical College Systems in FY06, if you, for your $329 million investment that year, with the graduates that were coming out of our technical colleges and from our quick start job creations and job savings in saving jobs in Georgia, and from our adult literacy graduates, the actual economic impact in real dollars, not an economic model that has a bunch of multipliers in it and is a little bit too, I took it in college, but I never understood it. So this is real dollars, $1.1 billion in return for a $329 million investment. It cost us more, $232 million in federal tax dollars that come into our system as well, and with our local funds from tuition and from other sources that the local colleges are able to come up with. It is quite an endeavor, but it certainly pales into comparison when you look at our sister agency, the Board of Regents. But nevertheless, we certainly contribute, I think, in a big way. By the numbers on that next page, you see the number of folks that we have in our programs at DTAE. 144,000 plus technical college students. We have, of those, 53,000 plus that are enrolled in our strategic industries, and those are 6 very specific strategic industries, and there's 3 others, hospitality, a couple of others that the governor has extended to a strategic industry. But we have focused in the past 3 years on the strategic industries for Georgia, and I'll talk a bit more about that. Online classes, because we're looking for efficient ways to deliver our instruction. We have 41,000 students enrolled online, and many of those take their full course load online. They come to class occasionally, but most all of their coursework is done online. In Quick Start programs, we've got 44,000 folks that go through Quick Start training. 10,000 jobs last year were created in Georgia through Quick Start projects. 15,000 jobs were saved by Quick Start projects. We got 95,000 students in adult literacy, and I want to talk a lot more about that in a minute. And we graduated 19,700 plus students with a GED last year. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Bottom line, our graduates get employed, or they go into school. And when you look at that, we looked at our 2003 students that came in 2003. And we looked at those students when they graduated in 2005, 6 months after their graduation. And they were making collectively $123 million more in salaries after they graduated from our programs. That is no small feat. It is something that we're very proud of. And I know it's changed the lives of those Georgians that came through those programs. In strategic industries, more importantly, those graduates, those 3,086 graduates that came through those programs in our strategic industries, they were making $46 million more than they were making when they came to us. That is a major increase, and it's very important for building that workforce in Georgia. We showed you on the pages some of the increases in salaries. In 2003, our graduates came in making $20,000. 6 months after they graduated, they were making $27,600. That's a 35% increase. You see that in 04 and 05. Those salaries continue to go up with our graduates. If you look then at the average earnings the year before and the year after graduating by these strategic industries, the changes there are significant, particularly if you look at healthcare. Those students came into our healthcare programs making $18,000 a year, $18,800, and when they graduated they were making $27,800. We know that because we matched those student IDs and those graduates with the Department of Labor status, their database on the salaries that those folks are making and the unemployment insurance information on those data matches. So we know those are real dollars. That's not just an estimate. Those are real dollars. If you look at GED return on investment, we spend about $457 on each student. Each adult literacy student annually. That's not a very big expenditure either. But of that $457 on each one of those students, state funds about 37% of that, or $169. If you look at what the average in this country of the salary increase of a GED graduate of being $9,600, that means that those students that we serve, those 2005 graduates, we spent $1,600,000 on them in state funds. But look at what they made. Their estimated earnings in the increase, that $7,932 increase that they made in their salary, I think I misspoke above, but $7,900 they made more in salaries after they got their GED. They were making $76 million, of which we were getting $4.6 million in state taxes off of that income. That meant for our investment of 1.6, we were returning $2.9 million back to the state treasury through their taxes. That's a great return on investment, and I think we need to really legitimately look at that cost that we're providing for adult literacy. So let's look at adult literacy. If you look on that page and you look at that map on the first page of the section of adult literacy that says Georgia's residents over 18 with less than a high school education. A disturbing fact, 1.3 million Georgians do not have a high school diploma or a GED. That's 23% of our population. Remember, we served 95,000 last year. That's a long way from 1.3 million. And if you look at those counties there, and you look at where your counties are in the percentage of the population that do not have a GED or a high school diploma, it's a pretty serious indictment of our workforce. It's one of our major missions is to make some impact on that. In order to make impact on that, we have to take a look at the way we're delivering services. We were really challenged in the last 2 years in adult literacy because it became, we went out and found ourselves a new assistant commissioner who actually was in Minnesota, Josephine Reed Taylor, who's not here today, but is an Atlanta native, grew up here, went to Booker T. Washington High School, knows the state, and has imparted a new energy in our adult literacy workforce. But if you look at the map, the second map in here, we only have about 10 counties where we're serving over 10% of the population that don't have a high school diploma. That's a huge, huge disconnect between building our workforce. And if you look at our GED graduates on that next sheet, we're going up 19,700 we graduated last year. Remember, 1.3 million don't have it. We're making progress, and that's great news, but it's still a huge challenge. One thing that we discovered through the SREB data that came out recently and some national data, our student-teacher ratio in our adult literacy classes is 60 to 1. 60 to 1. we are number 50 in the country in our student-teacher ratio in adult literacy. So it's a big challenge for us. We shared with you the adult literacy funding, $33.5 million total that we get funds for adult literacy. Of that, $11.3 million has been from state funds. The rest has been from grants in the federal government. Or our local colleges. And I must tell you, our local colleges who do adult literacy, they put a lot of their local dollars into these adult literacy programs, $2.1 million. It's a big commitment for our colleges, but we have some funding issues for just technical education, and to commit those to adult literacy is a big decision on their part. This year we were really challenged again. Department of Human Resources took a cut in TANF funds. I'm sure you've probably heard that from Commissioner Walker. The practical impact for us was we were getting a $4 million grant from them to provide services for their TANF recipients. They were referring TANF recipients that they couldn't get jobs for and didn't have high school diplomas and GEDs to us to provide services for. The good news is they're getting more and more of those TANF recipients jobs. They've put them to work. That means the requirement for them to send more students to us has declined, and they're actually sending less to us. And because they had a TANF cut, they cut our $4 million grant to about $2.2 million. That practically meant we were going to have to lose 71 full-time adult literacy teachers. That means there's a huge number of students that we could no longer serve. And here was the other piece of that. Just because they were $4 million in federal funds and they were coming for TANF recipients, those classrooms weren't sitting empty waiting for TANF recipients to show up. They were teaching Georgians who wanted their GEDs. The fact is, losing that money and losing those teachers would have exacerbated our 60-to-1 student-teacher ratio. It would have meant we could have served less Georgians when indeed we need to serve more Georgians. So if you look in your budget book and on the page here, the request that was recommended by the governor, and we certainly appreciate, essentially $3 million in 2008 to make up the difference for us in the loss of TANF funds and to give us some additional funds for more adult literacy teachers. That $3 million is made up of 2.5 direct appropriation and then a redirect of a $500,000 one-time funding we did for a Shirley Smith Center up in northwest Georgia. That's very important to us. I think it sends the right message and gets us on the right path with adult literacy. Then in the next piece, I want to talk to you quickly about economic development. Economic development's a key part of our mission, Quick Start. You all know Quick Start. You know what great work we do. Jackie Rahosky's here. Her staff, they just take the business sector of Georgia. They know them, and you can see the projects that they participated on the two maps on those 2 pages. Bottom line is for a very small, about $12 million investment for both expanding and new industries and existing industries, we have created 10,000 and saved 15,000 jobs in this past year. A great investment. The only thing that we are asking for and that the governor recommended was a $3.1 billion, that'd be nice, $3.1 million appropriation to support the KIA training. We're going to train every worker. Jackie and her staff, the Quick Start staff, will train every worker that goes to work at the KIA plant, 2,800 plus. We're also doing all the initial screening for them. It's a great piece of work. It's the largest piece of work we've ever undertaken, and the training will actually be underway in 2008. It'll be underway in 2007. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it's a huge piece of work for us. In our technical education, our biggest program, the vast majority of the appropriation is for our technical colleges and our technical education program. Show you our retention, graduation, and placement rate and how we compare. We've got a 66% retention rate, a 51% graduation rate, and an 84% job placement rate and a 98% placement rate when you consider those that are not in full-time jobs are going on probably to higher education. The very difficult thing for us is while we were experiencing a 29% increase in our enrollment from 2001 to 2006, but in the last 2 years we've experienced a decline, and reflected, you will note, in the governor's recommendation is because of that decline, a $7.1 million loss in funds because of our funding formula. Our funding is driven by our funding formula, and that some 3.8% reduction in enrollment has resulted in that $7.1 million decline. If you look on that page, it's in 336 and 337 of your budget report. It's what the governor recommended in our technical education program. The biggest issues here is certainly the enrollment decline, 7.1. We got recommended 892,000 for new square footage coming online. A very much appreciated increase in electricity and gas costs. Those operating expenses are critically important to us. We've had over the past, I'd say the past 4 years, I believe our calculations would we had over a $6 million increase in our utility costs. But this $2.8 million will certainly assist us and help us in our operating costs. Fast Track Nursing Program, great program. I've got a page next to it, right behind this, that'll tell you a little bit more about that program. $650,000 for that, and then minor repairs and renovation and replacement of obsolete equipment. Those are items that have been moved into cash this year. 10.7 for MR&R and $10 million for the obsolete equipment. And you see the same thing the Chancellor just spoke to you there about the $3.6 million that's being transferred out of our budget into the Board of Regents budget for the Georgia Aviation. That Fast Track Nursing Program was a program that we came up with, and Dr. Frieda Hill, who's our Assistant Commissioner for Technical Education, former president down at Southwest Georgia Technical College, and we were trying to figure out some way to deal with this nursing shortage. We found $650,000, cobbled it together out of our budget, and started this Fast Track Nursing Program at these 5 colleges. And essentially what it is we build on existing programs, so we don't need approval from anybody to create a new program because they're an existing program. They're just putting satellite campuses on other college campuses of that program. In other words, they're just providing that program at other college campuses. We're doing that with $650,000, 108 additional nurses over the next 2 years that we can do that way. We're continuing to look for opportunities that will allow us to do that. Our capital outlay then, if I can move quickly to capital outlay, we had $148 million worth of projects that we requested this year. There's still a number of projects which are waiting to get on this list. The total of that's probably around $220 million, but our state board has gone through a very laborious prioritization process, and these projects were selected by our state board and put in this order based on what they believed were the needs of the colleges and the system. And as you see here, there are 11 major projects. The 2 highlighted in red are the ones that the governor recommended. The next page, $29 million plus worth of minor projects. There are 7 of those. None of those were recommended. And then equipment for the FY07 construction projects. There are 12 of those. 3 of those were not on the list. The ones highlighted in red were recommended, and we appreciate that. The 3 that are not recommended, we believe that their construction is either further out or we're going to be able to handle them internally within OPB. I mean within, I wish OPB, within DTAE. Sorry, that was a slip of the tongue. I used to be there, okay? Amended FY07, the request for state funds are amended is real straightforward. Basically, there's two items. The Kia training commitment. We're actually starting that Kia training this year for $604,000. I'm not sure how many trainees we're expecting to actually bring up and start training in that training facility. And we built Kia a temporary training facility and offices in the Raytheon building, which we are eventually converting and have money to convert that building to our entire campus for West Georgia Technical College in LaGrange. But when we brought that building up to build these temporary offices for Kia, we had to turn on the electricity and the water and all those things. It was not in our budget, and it was an immense output for utilities just to do the renovation. No one was in the building except for the people doing the renovating. So we requested $277,000 to help us with that unexpected utility cost. And then we were fortunate to have the governor recommend for us $1.8 million to cover us through the rest of this fiscal year with those adult literacy teachers that we were losing from that TANF fund loss. Again, referring back to the return on investment, anything that you all provide for us and the great support you've given us over the past, we'll turn into good investments back for you. And that's pretty much our story. We're very proud of DTAE and what we do in our technical colleges and what they do in their communities. Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to take questions.
Thank you. Acting Commissioner, what is your proper term?
Interim Commissioner.
Interim Commissioner, but we appreciate all you do and all DTAE does for Georgia. We've got to hold these questions as quick, short as we can. We're running out of time, but we'd like to have you back next week or some of your staffers back for follow-up questions.
Anytime you need us.
Thank you, sir. And Representative Lewis is first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, I got two questions. The
Yes, sir.
first one is on the capital outlay request page, the equipment construction project.
Yes, sir.
And I'm only going to ask this about North Metro Tech, but your answer may apply to all of these. But specifically, North Metro Tech, I think we passed some bond money in the budget for about $10.3 million for the Allied Health Building.
Yes,
and I
sir.
see where we're doing just under $2 million there. Could you explain just a little further?
This is just to purchase the equipment for when that building comes online.
And
so
I
we can
assume that's true for all these items.
All these items were funded in a previous year, and the buildings are coming online during the 07 or during the 08 budget year.
Okay. My second question, if you would, you mentioned about utility energy costs going up in
Yes.
all your facilities.
Yes.
I'm assuming that when you pay your electric bill, for example, you pay sales tax associated to that power bill. Is that correct?
That's a good question.
If you don't have to tell me now, but
I'm
if
not
you
sure.
would,
I will
between
find
now
that
and
out.
when you come back next week, if it's possible for you to get this information,
Yes.
I would be curious to know if, one, you do in fact pay a sales tax on your electric and other energy consumption, and if you could determine roughly how much that is and your budget.
Right.
I'd like to know that as well, if you would, please.
I will find that out for you. I don't believe we do, but we pay utilities to so many different utility companies that I just want to check and make sure on that, but I'll bring that back to you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Representative Earhart? Roy. Representative Roy.
Commissioner, I asked the Chancellor, I want to ask you too.
Yes, sir.
Why did you transfer the aviation school to the Regents?
It was indeed a conversation that did begin to occur probably out of the Commission for a New Georgia Aviation Task Force. It was not really a recommendation that came out of that group, although they were interested in it. They were looking at all the state's aviation assets. They came down to our college, and as any of you who have been to that college are pretty well blown away at what was there. And in fact, with only 200 and something students doing great and producing a lot of great things, and something we're very proud of, I think the aviation professionals who were on that task force began to ask the question, are we underutilizing it? Are there other ways that we could even maximize what we have in that remarkable facility? And in conversations I think they had, I think in conversations that the governor began to have, and hearing from the aviation industry that indeed a 4-year aviation program was something that would be a very enhancing thing to Georgia's economy and our aviation and aerospace industry, that a 4-year program looked like a great idea. Commissioner Vollmer and the Chancellor began to have those conversations, were brought in with the governor on them, and I think that the bottom line was they believe, and it looks like a good proposition, to combine the resources and to a 4-year college. You know, where we're located down there, we don't have dormitories. It's pretty remote. To expand beyond the number of students we have, to attract folks there, there was a belief that a 4-year institution and a 4-year program would enhance what we were producing there for the citizens of Georgia. And I think for those reasons, we began a process of looking at what it would look like and how we would do that transfer. We now have a fairly comprehensive plan that the Board of Regents and we have worked together on. Commissioner Vollmer and the Chancellor have been to the communities down there and talked to the communities about it. There was initially some resistance. There's always a little bit of anxiety when you have a change like this. The bottom line was it was a determination. I think the governor feels strongly, and both of our agencies feel like it's a reasonable thing and a positive thing to do, and we've put a plan in place that we're ready to go forward with.
Since you don't have dormitories and you are limited down there, you're going to leave it at that location, you're going to move it?
I think they'll still use the facility. It's a great investment, but exactly how they get the students back and forth, the Board of Regents thinks they've got a plan that they can enhance the number of folks they have there. I think also that we have a lot of trainers, a lot of equipment, a lot of things there that are very positive for Georgia, a lot of great programs, and we believe, and we're committed to continue to work with the Board of Regents to make it successful in any kind of partnership they ask us to do. So
you concur with the decision there?
We concur that it's a good decision.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for that presentation.
Sure.
I want to take you back 2 years. You will probably recall that we placed language in the budget with respect to voice over IP.
Yes.
And you guys had come up with an excellent plan for about a 5-year period to save us about $5 million.
Yes, sir.
Now, I had a meeting with you and with the Georgia Technology Authority last year when they, for whatever reason, didn't implement that language. Your department has been very good at trying to move this along. Mm-hmm. They assured me at that meeting a year ago that they would implement it. I'm being told now that it's still not implemented, or it's certainly not there. What I'd like to ask is, can you get us some numbers of what it would take to allow you to fully implement that program independently of the Georgia Technology Authority, and what amount of money we need to shift from their budget over to yours to make that happen?
We can give you some numbers on that, Representative. I do know this. The Georgia Technology Authority has just entered into an enterprise contract for VoIP. They went out on bid, and they entered into a contract. I've not seen that contract. I've talked to the interim commissioner over there, Patrick Moore, who oversaw that, and their intent was to move it out and make it happen for all the state government. We're going to take a strong look at that. We did go ahead and implement VoIP with GTA's support at 4 of our colleges, and we have those implemented.
4 out of how many?
34.
Okay, I think that wasn't not the intent of the, as you know, was not the intent of the legislative language. It seems to be a trend today about executive branch and legislative branch having differences of opinion about how we get to a point when we pass something with the will of all the legislative body.
We were happy to participate in the pilot programs that we implemented, but we'll get you some numbers on what it would look like if we went system-wide with it.
And I'd like to know, I guess, since they've signed that contract, or whether they have, what are the consequences of not having you in it? Were you an integral part of that contract through the negotiated process or whatever your system was. Just out of curiosity, not that I really care. We need to get to that point.
We had some conversations and representation at some points in time during the process, but I do know they did sign that enterprise contract.
I'd really like to get to that this year. We'll just do it through the budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Sims.
Just
Yes,
a quick
sir.
question. On your adult literacy,
Yes.
and I understand how important that is, because down in my area, that is a problem. What is the average salary on an adult literacy teacher, and what's it going to take to get that up?
Kim, do you know that?
Yeah, the total salary is about $41,000 for the full-time adult literacy teachers.
The
Do
full
they have to be a K through 12 type teacher, or they're
They have to have a 4-year degree, at least a bachelor's level degree, and then a commitment to participate in staff development that will help prepare them to better serve adults.
just a 4-year degree? I mean, it could be in political science, it could be in nursing, it could be in anything. I mean, but it has to be a 4-year degree.
That is correct. And then we provide the professional development in terms of how to teach instructional strategies for teaching adults and how adults learn.
And they do not have to have a teaching certificate,
They
correct?
do not have to have a teaching certificate.
I understand. Let me ask this question. Do you, and I think y'all have been doing this as follow on, are y'all expanding that away from the campuses and onto to different areas? I think that may be a good idea. I mean, I've seen that, I think, in the past. I just wonder if is there some way we can expand that? You got a lot of areas, especially in South Georgia, Southeast and Southwest Georgia, that may not have a campus, but they've got a lot of problems. And I wondered if they could expand that somewhere.
We have a number of education centers that we have opened, particularly in rural Georgia, where we have a lot of our adult literacy classes that we hold. Some of our satellite to our branch campuses also, we have those adult literacy classes. And Assistant Commissioner Josephine Reed Taylor and her staff are looking at ways we can get those classes more closely to everyone who needs them.
How about local high schools? Can we do that also, ma'am?
Yes, and we do have classes also in churches and other community-based organizations. We not only offer classes at the school site, but in the community as well. And it's based on the need of that respective community. The adult literacy director will work very closely, say for instance, if there's an interest group at a local church to actually provide adult literacy programs at churches. Some of our ESL or English for speakers of other language courses are offered at faith-based organizations.
My last follow-on question: do you find that the adult literacy problem is more prevalent with the non-speaking, non-English speaking, or the limited English speaking population, or do you find it more prevalent among others? I just wonder. That's just a question.
Based on the census data that was shared with you, that 18 and above, there are 1.3 million adults without a high school diploma.
I understand.
When we look at the functional literacy level, of course, the hardest to serve population are those with the lowest functional literacy levels. The ESL population, based on English not being their native language, we have a large influx of those individuals that choose to come to class because they're wanting to better navigate within the community. But those individuals that have the lower functional literacy skills, that's the hardest to serve in terms of recruiting those individuals into the program, and they take a longer time to serve. So I wouldn't necessarily say that one is more problematic than the other. It's just differences among those populations, and they're both a challenge in a sense to serve, but I don't think that there's a difference in terms of the difficulty in serving.
And ESL, those ESL people that we serve is a much smaller percentage than, it's a smaller percentage of the population than the 1.3 million that we need to serve.
I understand.
Yeah.
That was just a question.
Yeah. But they're a huge challenge for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is something that maybe your office or staff could get for me. Mm-hmm. Can you get me a list of the technical colleges that are adjacent to two-year colleges?
Yes, sir.
And also, and this goes back to the question about the sudden consolidation down in Middle Georgia, but maybe in the general area, first of all, I'd like to know which ones are adjacent.
Yes, sir.
And then maybe expand out. I don't know how many miles apart the aviation school was from the other school. But if you can take it to another level and find the next maybe a 5 mile radius, 10 mile radius,
Surely.
and just get that information for me.
We can do that.
Okay.
We can do that.
Thank you.
We'll make sure the chancellor knows we're doing that, but yes, sir.
No, that's okay. He doesn't have to know. You can just.
Commissioner,
Yes, sir.
in light of this change in the aviation school,
Yes, sir.
are there other schools within the DTE that y'all anticipate changing at this time? Or is any talk between the technical and regents?
There's no plans. We've had no discussions about any other transfer of any other institutions or consolidation of any of those at this point in time. You know, that's since I've been in Georgia almost 18 years and at OPB 11 years. That conversation comes up from time to time about whether we ought to maybe do some things about colleges that are adjacent to each other, but we have no plans for anything at this point in time.
I got a few questions. If somebody else needs to come in, we'll do this again next week with some follow-up questions. Regarding Quick Start,
yes,
it's an incredible duty that you do for Georgia. I asked you the other day at the budget hearings, do you have enough money to fund that particularly? In the event we have another industry coming in that needs that help.
Well, when those big projects like Kia come in, we can't do it without your support and help. As when we have if we've got our medium size and what would be our typical projects, the 12-point-something million that we've gotten annually, we've been able to do that work for them and do it successfully. Any of you all that have not been to the Quick Start offices and seen the capabilities that we can provide to companies with the staff that we have, it's impressive. And unless we have a big major project come in or a project that goes beyond that $12 million that we get annually, we would come back and ask the governor and you all to support some support for that. This Kia project, when you help screen and train 2,800 high-tech manufacturing people, and I mean this is really high-tech robotics, things that we've never seen in Georgia before. Fortunately, we can go down the road in Alabama to their Hyundai plant and get a picture of what that looks like. But this is totally different training, and we're going to train 2,800 folks through our program and a continuing training program as they have any turnover there.
I'd like to get this whole committee to come witness what you do at Quick Start. It's incredible. So
it is great. We'll invite you and love to host you down there anytime.
Next thing is relating to the aviation school.
Yes.
Once again, at what point did you and regents come together on this, and was the legislature involved in any of the decision making on this?
A little bit before my time, and Commissioner Vollmer and the Chancellor were having conversations pretty quickly after the Chancellor arrived, and I can't remember when the Aviation Task Force of the Commission came together, but it was in that time frame. It's been probably over a year, and once the proposal came out, I do know that the local delegations down there were contacted. Some of them heard about it and contacted us, but there were conversations with the local delegation. Exactly how and when those happened, Commissioner Vollmer could answer that question a lot better than I could.
So this thing evolved between the regents and the Commissioner of DTA and the executive branch. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And at what point was this group going to notify the legislative process about this changeover?
I'm probably not adequate to answer that question, other than the local delegation was brought into it, and exactly when that would happen for the full body, I guess, as it came out. And
okay, thank you. Regarding retention, I noticed somewhere
yes.
way back in your in your conversation that
Yes, sir.
That you're losing. You perhaps maybe losing some students because
Yes.
you can't get into a class because there's not enough classroom.
Right.
And which leads me to the bigger question, that is your funding formula.
Yes.
It has shrunk because you lost something from 2 years ago, and now and you have to depend on those funds.
Yes.
It's all about the funding formula. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, what happens when you lose students? Say you have, what was it, 1,600 that you turn away. How does that affect your funding formula?
Well, we have 8,600 students that are on a waiting list for nursing programs. 8,600. Typically, at one time, they might have churned in what we call churned in our system and taken other courses until they got into the program, which was not bad for them. It was good for their career and their education, but we had them as a student. Now, and it's another issue, and there are a lot of reasons, but many of them have chosen not to stay in one of our programs or take other coursework because of the Hope Cap. If that has reduced our churning, and we've also recognized and have been concerned and talked about, we've had a large increase in where we're having decreases or we can't serve students, of students going to proprietary schools and entering proprietary schools, technical schools, which we lose track of them then, but if they don't show back up, we think that churning in those waiting lists, particularly in the healthcare area, has been a real challenge for us. And that's one reason we went to the fast track nursing program, was to capture more of those students and keep them without losing them. One of the biggest challenges of our funding formula is that all programs are not the same. All enrollment declines are not the same. Our biggest enrollment decline has been in the business area and computer information systems. It cost us $101 per credit hour to provide that program. Nursing programs, which we've had an increase in, and we want an increase in, and our other health programs, which we want an increase in, it's a strategic industry, those high-cost health programs cost us $391 a credit hour. For our loss in business programs last year, it actually saved us $2.3 million. But our increase, although smaller than our loss, in healthcare programs cost us $3.2 million. So it was not a zero-sum game. That's a challenge for us. So for us to continue to provide the level of services and the quality of services that I think we're known for and that's important to Georgia, that loss of funds is really tough.
Thank you very much. And we'll have you back next week after we have Student Finance Commission and GSFIC in.
We'll be glad to be here.
Thank you
Just
very
let us
much,
know
sir.
when. Thank you.
Next up is Nancy Hall with Georgia Public Broadcasting. Let's try to hold it quickly, because I hope some of the members will stay with us, because we do have. Okay. Good afternoon, Ms. Hall.
Hello, how are you, sir?
And if you could keep yours brief, because we may have another meeting over at Georgia Public Broadcasting like we did last
good.
year. And for the members that weren't there, I believe that we had everybody sitting still, looking pretty, didn't get up and leave, no cell phones and all, and it was a very nice meeting.
It was a good-looking group, and it was an important session, and we appreciated having you there.
So if you could hold this brief, we're running way behind.
Okay, we'd love.
We do want to come to your facilities maybe next week or the following.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll save. I wanted to update you on several things that we've been doing in television and radio, and some of the outreach efforts that we've been doing in our digital conversion, which I know you're very interested in. But in the interest of time, I can go ahead and just give you a quick overview of the budget, and I think I can keep you on time because we're a very small amount in this budget, and we're not in the supplemental budget. There are no increase in funds in the supplemental FY07 budget for us. There are some funds in the governor has recommended in the FY08 budget. There are three items that are increases for us. First of all is $565,890, which are the common budget changes, the statewide budget changes. They also have recommended $370,676 for 5 positions to monitor the digital and analog signals simultaneously, which is something we're doing. We're on, I don't know what document you have. We don't, it's in the budget book. It's on page 290, so in the governor's budget book.
They've got the 07 amended document.
Oh, okay. I don't have anything. So, okay. Okay. But, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And for the 5 positions, it's the second item under our recommended changes is these positions would monitor the digital analog broadcast signals continuously. With the FCC rules require that we run our current analog signal until February 17, 2009, so we'll be broadcasting both the analog and digital signals at the same time until that time. And because we monitor our analog television channels 24/7, however, we, in addition to the digital channels, we also have 7 online streams that we're doing now. They're an IT function, and they're not being continuously monitored because of the lack of personnel. The online channels, which are currently about an IT operation, they operate 8 to 5, as you would imagine. They include such programs as the streaming from the House and Senate, the House committee meetings, ICLE training for the legal field, the Department of Education professional development and training, as well as training in statewide meetings and things like that for other state agencies. That doesn't include the downloads and streaming done for educators across the state. By the way, the service that we do provide, the downloads for teachers, the streaming continuously, we've seen more than a doubling of its usage each year since we introduced that resource for teachers. More than 1 million downloads were made by educators from this service last school year, and again this year we are seeing that usage double. The addition recommended by the governor will allow us to expand our IT staff to monitor, maintain, and troubleshoot for our new digital broadcast as well as our other distribution methods, and it will allow us to do it 24/7. It will also allow us to recruit the kind of personnel who have enhanced skill sets and experience in the diverse new world of hybrid multimedia, rich media, new media, whatever you want to call it, broadcast systems, as all those systems are converging, those broadcast mediums. The third item that the governor has recommended is an increase, $116,400 for an increase in utility expenses and in our field activities. And that's, again, because of the digital and analog signals that we'll be sending at the same time. And that's for until the 2010 fiscal year budget that we would be doing both of those things. We are out there with our digital conversion in all the sites around the state. We're down in Pelham, so working on the tower and doing some things like that. So we're real excited about this opportunity. I'll be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman. I think I've kept you pretty tightly there and on time. And I had all the stuff I wanted to brag about, but I'll wait till you come to my place.
Representative Royal has a question.
Yes, sir.
Where are you in the conversion to digital in the system-wide?
Well, we're in different places around the state. We have several sites.
How many have you converted and how many?
None are completely converted. We hope to be online with digital in the summer here in Atlanta. We've got emergency situations with low power in Savannah and Waycross that will probably be earlier than that, and then we'll be finishing out. We will be finished with everything, we hope, by this time next year. We're trying to finish off.
What about Pelham? What's the status of that one?
Pelham is one of the ones that we're paying close attention to, so we've got folks down there working on it. We know how significant and important that part of the state is. We appreciate that.
Representative Sims.
Yes, sir.
A couple of questions, one
Yes,
comment. Have y'all had a problem with your satellite uplink with some of this stuff that's going on with the satellite TV network problems? Have y'all experienced this? Or, we've got about 350,000 people down my way that can't get the channels that they had normally had. Now we've had some other problems with that, with the I don't know if are you familiar with that problem?
Well, we have had some problems ourselves. I think several places have. It's in our situation, some of our equipment is almost 40 years old,
Yes,
and that's why this digital is so important to us. But there have been significant issues with satellite feeds from some of our program providers as well.
Yes, ma'am. You're aware that you're on like Direct TV and things like that.
Right.
That's the problem that I'm
see.
speaking of.
Mm-hmm.
They're having problems now with some kind of lawsuit, and I didn't know if y'all were aware of this was going on, and you weren't being able to be transmitted in certain areas.
There are always situations in which people ask to be excluded from our service area and things like that, to either conflicts and digital Direct TV particularly has had a lawsuit, but it shouldn't be impacting our coverage much.
Second question is just on I watch a lot of your programming, but one of the things I know that most everybody watches is the state playoffs.
Everybody watches it.
All right, let me ask you a question. Has
Yes.
there been a thought that you might want to carry a game of the week across the state on Friday nights, and maybe even a game of the week for basketball? I just thought about it might be something that y'all may want to introduce. I don't know if that's been thought or not.
We would love to do that. Our board is very interested in doing more local programming. The problem with that kind of thing is the expense when you go off site, and we'd have to get it underwritten. But that is a popular program. Once again, this year we were the most watched public television station in the country when we air those football games, and we had over 1,000 people watching it on the internet as well. So we were real proud of that.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. We're going to plan to come there next week for some other meetings.
Okay.
If the members will just sit here for about 5 minutes to 10 minutes more, I have two special guys that I thought I could work in earlier, but if you could come forward, Ross Mason and Jeff Stewart, if y'all could bear with us about 8 to 10 minutes. This is a group here that has some alternative financing for higher education. I mean, if we can't get it done today, Jeff and Ross, we'll have you back again in the next week to follow up. This is some exciting stuff that the Regents and DTAE and others should have an interest in. Jeff Stewart is, if you could introduce yourself real quickly, and let's try to hold it to 5 or 8, 10 minutes. Let's get out of here. We'll come back again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and esteemed representatives, and we will keep this short. We won't cover everything in the handout, but it's there for you to read. And our contact information, our email, and our phone numbers are on there as well. So if you have follow-up questions, we invite your contacting us. What we want to talk to you about is that we're not asking for something today. We just want to make you aware of something, opportunity, and it's really the confluence and intersection of various constituencies, those being Georgia, universities, nanotechnology, healthcare, and private equity. And in a sense, it's a de facto public-private partnership. It's the opportunity to take the intellectual capital in Georgia in our university institutions and turn that from research and basic research into applied science to improve healthcare, and to look at categories within Georgia in which we are already excelling, where we can use nanotechnology or other value innovation to develop new strategies and methods for products in healthcare to make a significant difference in global applications. And before I get into that thought, I just want to point your attention to page 3 so we can do a quick overview of the intellectual property in Georgia and the federal financing that it has attracted under the heading Nanotechnology Research in Georgia. First, let's look at the universities. Nanotechnology research at Georgia universities. Within the South, the state of Georgia ranks first in the number of nanotechnology scientist winners of awards, prize winners. We rank second in the number of nanotechnology publications. We rank second in the number of highly cited scientific publications in nanotechnology worldwide. We rank second in the number of doctoral dissertations in nanotechnology, and we rank third in the number of nanotechnology patents. We have a significant presence in intellectual capital intellectual capital in our universities. Then let's look at how that's attracting money in the nanomedical field for potential applications. So we go to the next segment, large federal grants to Georgia universities for nanomedical research. 2004, $10 million in grants for cancer diagnostics. 2005, almost $12 million for nanotechnology strategies in cardiovascular disease. Also 2005, another $20 million grant for cancer therapeutics and the establishment of only one of 8 centers across the country in nanotechnology excellence for cancer, and that was from the National Cancer Institute. And then finally, in 2006, there was a recent $10 million grant for DNA damage and the treatment of that. So we have a very significant presence of intellectual property and nanotechnology. We are attracting federal funds for nanomedical research. And then we ask, how can we join together the state of Georgia, its universities, and the application in healthcare for nanotechnology with private equity, and why is there a need for that? And with that, I'd like to invite Ross Mason, who, like I, am a managing director of Henry Ventures, to talk a little bit about what is Henry Ventures, how are we different from other venture capital funds, and who are the members of our board of advisors. Quickly following that, I want to just give you a brief outline of the basics of nanotechnology and a few other points, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Ross Mason. I went to Georgia Tech, Wharton MBA. I think that real estate business in Russia for 12 years, was on the West Coast in venture capital for 5, advised the Frank Russell Company, who's one of the few money managers in the country with over $1 trillion in assets. And as they started to start their pension practices, venture and angel arm, in addition to working with the German government and representing them on the West Coast, they were making a 500 million euro investment in partnership with Volkswagen to diversify the economy in Wolfsburg. Before that, I was a private banker in New York and in Europe. Jeff has 25 years of structuring M&A transactions for Arnold Goldman Gregory. He is, which is one of the premier biotech firms in the Southeast. Jeff is also the founder of the Georgia Nanotechnology Business Alliance, and he's on the board at Dartmouth in their Nanotechnology Research Center. Quickly about, and the reason I moved back to Georgia is because we have a unique opportunity. We have the CDC, which is the only one in the world focused on global health. We have a former President of the United States, a former Surgeon General, a former Secretary of Health and Human Services, and a former Speaker of the House, who are spending the majority of their time on global health issues. You've got the Gates Foundation that's spending over $30 billion. Buffett just doubled it to focus on global health issues. You've got President Clinton, who just raised over $7 billion to focus on these issues. And as the Georgia Research Alliance has determined, their focus is going to be on antivirals and on vaccines. We have an opportunity to be a global leader in this area. And I think it's particularly relevant. And again, we're a de novo fund, but from a pension standpoint, Georgia is one of 4 states that does not do alternative investments with our pension. The Georgia Public Policy Foundation did a study in 2005 that determined if we had, when we founded the Georgia Research Alliance, also with our 2 largest public pensions, made an allocation into private equity, into alternative investments, we would have created last year, over that 15-year period, another 410,000 high-tech jobs and had another $4.5 billion in the state coffers. Henry, quickly about Henry, we invest in, as Jeff said, in nanotechnology and value innovations and other value shifting products and methods. We focus on first world profit potential with third world humanitarian impact. We do, and we also, as I may alluded to, seek to form and have formed alliances with foundations, governments, corporations, and outreach programs, including contract research organizations. And one of our investments has relationships with almost 700 scientists across the U.S., which is another area I was involved in venture in Silicon Valley, was representing nanotechnology research scientists. On our board is Bill Ide, the former chairman of the American Bar Association, who's here in Georgia and is very close to the Gates Foundation. Corey Gorman, who is the co-founder of DNA Bridges, who discovered Herceptin, which is one of Genentech's. It is their most successful drug. Harrison Rogers, the former president of the American Medical Association, and Dr. Lewis Sullivan, who is the former Secretary of Health and Human Services in Bush 41 administration, who is also the founder of the Morehouse School of Medicine. Jeff, if you want to give a little bit more specifics about nanotechnology.
Okay. So what is nanotechnology? We hear about in the media, and what are the areas of primary application? The three primary areas are healthcare, IT and electronics, and then materials. 40% of the venture capital money that's gone into nanotechnology companies has gone into supporting healthcare endeavors. And then there's been 40% in IT and another 20% in electronics. But what are the opportunities in nanotechnology, and what is it? Nanotechnology is first and foremost an enabling technology. Second, what it does is it takes existing products and enables or improves them, or existing materials and enables and improves them by changing the physical, chemical, electrical, magnetic, or optical characteristics of the products or those components. And these are changed by manipulating matter up to 100 nanometers in size. And 1 nanometer is 1/100th of a billionth of a meter, and a strand of hair is generally 70,000 nanometers. So that's the size of it. So where does it fit? If you look at where we're going to go in the next 10, 20 years in nanotechnology, global government and corporate research and development expenditures in nanotechnology reached $9.6 billion in 2005. Global sales of nanotechnology-enabled products reached $30 billion in 2005. And global sales of nanotechnology-enabled products are projected to reach $2.6 trillion by 2014 worldwide, representing 15% of total global commerce. So what are we looking at in healthcare? Well, we're looking at making a difference in cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, flu, hepatitis, HIV/AIDS, malnutrition, malaria, obesity. We're looking to make a difference in nanotechnology by changing the characteristics of therapeutics, vaccinations, diagnostics, medical devices, medical supplies, and even in clean tech for water supplies, water purification, or monitoring the quality of food. The projected U.S. market size for nanomedical products by 2014 would be $17 billion in therapeutics, $2.2 billion in diagnostics, $9 billion in medical devices, almost $30 billion in sales. So why Henry Ventures and why now? This is important. Georgia is rich in intellectual capital and has a void or deficit in financial capital to support the spin-out companies from universities, to bridge the gap between the great intellectual property that we have here in Georgia and the opportunity to build a strong presence in applied science in healthcare. Here's an example. While we are a much smaller state, we have 50% of the intellectual property of California, which is startling in its achievement. If we look at the flip side of that, though, on the financial support, from angel investors that are usually the ones who step forward and finance a university spin-out company, we only have 1/10 of 1% of the capital flowing in to support the university spin-out at the angel level, 1/10 of 1 support of what California has. Then if you look at venture capital in the startup or emerging company stage, we only have 3.7% of the money flowing into startup and emerging companies that California has. Again, compare that to the fact that from the rich domain of intellectual capital, we are at 50% of what California has. So that, in the last page, means from the free market and from public-private de facto partnerships, we have a capital gap. And Henry Ventures hopes to partner with our state's universities and help to meet that capital gap and to bring to the market new solutions for large unmet medical needs with first world applications and potential third world humanitarian benefits. And we thank you for your time and your long day to allow us to speak.
I don't see any questions, but I want to ask one, and we want to get you to come back with a couple of other groups like this, because I don't know if you were here or not, but it's how many $billion was it, Tom, that the $3.4 billion of capital needs in Georgia over the next 10 years. And this is purely, the reason we have him here is to have both of you here is to start the process, at least from our standpoint, because this is what we do on this committee. And I'd like to have you back again. And this is very intriguing when you talk about trillions of dollars in the market from nanotechnology over the next 10, 12 years. Is that what you said?
By 2014, yes, 15% of global economy, over $2 trillion in revenues generated by products in the marketplace.
So if you're talking that many dollars in the marketplace, and we got a $3 billion need over the next 10 years in the higher ed just alone, then maybe dovetailing what you're doing in the nanotechnology and the venture capital funding or alternative funding would maybe bridge that problem or that gap that we have. Is this making any sense to the members here? That going forward, we'd like to maybe in the next week or two have you and some other venture capital people when we're fresh and they know you're coming on, because see, most of them didn't know you were because they weren't on the schedule. But anyways, I appreciate what both of you do and coming and being patient and waiting on us. But and for the members, tomorrow morning we've got at 9 o'clock. Is that where it is? 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Here, same room. Same room. We're trying to move forward with this so we can avoid some of the conflicts with committee hearings later. So tomorrow morning at 9, I think in this room, look for your internet source for the meeting tomorrow.
Who will we hear from tomorrow?
Sir?
Who will we hear from tomorrow?
We'll hear from, we're working on GSFIC, Student Finance Commission. We're trying to work them in Wednesday or tomorrow. And then primarily what we're going to hear from tomorrow, instead of just hearing President speak like we did for 2 years, these are only those that have a capital project or an equipment project that are coming before the committees, both those that were approved by the governor or in his recommendation and those that were recommended by the DTA board and the Board of Regents. So this is what we're trying to let them have a hearing on this tomorrow and the next day, but it's certainly different from the first 2 years where we heard 50 presidents. It's quite, we trimmed it down considerably, although it's a lot of people here. But any questions from the members?
Just a question. When was this meeting called for tomorrow?
Sir?
I don't have a notice of this meeting for tomorrow. When was it called?
It's 9 and 5:15. 9 o'clock.
Has the notice gone out for that?
Should have.
I didn't get it.
It's on the website.
Well, they don't get the website.
We can't go to the website because we're in here all day. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Thank you very much.